Excellent. Thank you, Dolores. And yeah, thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure to be at the Web3 Infinity Hackathon opening ceremony today. I'm super excited to obviously follow through over the next couple of weeks on the progress of all the teams, and of course, ideally getting to meet some of them in person once we get to the final event around the middle of August. So super excited about that. Quick introduction. I am Stefano. I'm the head of platform at LongHash Ventures. I look after our accelerator program and partnerships, as well as venture building with our portfolio companies. So we're going to talk today about what do investors and accelerators look for when they consider early stage Web3 projects, either for investment or to accept them into their accelerator program. And I will give a little bit of an introduction to LongHash Ventures and talk a little bit about our great partnership that we have with Protocol Labs, our track record, as an accelerator, particularly with some of the Filecoin cohorts that we've been running over the last couple of years. Then I'll talk a bit about, for us as an investor and accelerator, what is the typical criteria we use to evaluate early stage teams that we accept into our program. And then lastly, I thought that, in addition to the criteria, I thought I would also share, some tips and tricks for whenever you are, meeting an investor, when you're going through fundraising rounds, or you're applying to an accelerator program, whether it's ours or somebody else's. What are some of those tips and tricks that can really help you to articulate what you are building, what you are solving for, and effectively how are you going to go and execute on that plan. So maybe let me start first with an introduction to LongHash Ventures. So we were founded in 2018 as Asia's first Web3 accelerator. And we've been running various accelerator cohorts over the past several years. We're also one of Asia's leading Web3 VC funds, and we invest across the key Web3 verticals, including DeFi, NFT and culture, DAO and social, gamify and metaverse, and tooling and infrastructure. Some of the portfolio highlights, both from our investments as well as from the teams that have come through the accelerator, include Lit Protocol and Lighthouse, both of which actually came from our last Filecoin accelerator cohort. And then some other notable portfolio companies that we have invested in include Saga, Instadapp, Zapper, and Balancer. We're also a thought leader in the Web3 space. We have published multiple seminal reports on key Web3 topics, including a tokenomics blueprint for early stage Web3 projects to help guide them on how to think about tokenomics design, how to think about the utility for their token. We've also published a governance blueprint, also to help these very early stage Web3 projects on how to think about decentralization, not just of the technology, obviously, but also decentralization of the governance and the community, and how basically the protocol is run into the future and to the true spirit of Web3, as well as other multiple reports on various Web3 topics and Web3 verticals. And lastly, we are the go-to partner in Asia for Protocol Labs, and we run the LongHashX Accelerator Filecoin cohort. We actually just completed our recruiting for the third edition of this cohort, but not to worry, because we do actually run these cohorts usually twice a year. So, as you go through the hackathon, as you start to hack away at your idea, as the team starts to coalesce on an actual product and a solution, definitely, follow us, keep in touch with us, and potentially we can discuss considering you for our next hackathon, our next accelerator a few months down the line. Just touching quickly on our track record. So we've so far conducted 7 cohorts of our program. We've had over 50 projects that have been accelerated, and we've helped them raise over $100 million in funding thanks to the investor introductions that we've made typically after our demo day. We've had about 5 projects with valuations between 1 and 10 billion, and about 9 projects with valuations between 100 million and $1 billion. And some of the alumni highlights, both from the Filecoin cohorts and some of the other cohorts that we've run, you can see there on the screen. And lastly, the last point I wanted to make, as part of setting a bit of the context for the discussion today, what I wanted to share on the criteria for selecting teams that come through our program is that, for the teams that actually get accepted, we typically offer 5 things. So the first one is we do invest into every team that comes through the program. We also have a very structured Web3 native program where we have fortnightly workshops and fireside chats on topics like tokenomics design, decentralized governance, community building, and usually we invite leading Web3 investors as well as Web3 co-founders to join us for those discussions. We conduct in-depth venture building on Web3 native topics. We meet with you on a weekly basis to do problem solving. We can choose a topic like tokenomics design, like governance, like product design, and we'll actually help you to work through those topics hand in hand over the duration of the program. We also make an introduction to our mentor network. So it includes Web3 investors, Web3 founders, Web3 CTOs that can meet you on a one-to-one basis and answer any questions you might have about fundraising, about the entrepreneurship journey as a Web3 founder, on technical topics, depending on what you're building, and so on and so forth. And lastly, we have our graduation event, which is our demo day, where you get to pitch your product or your solution to investors, and then it kicks off your formal fundraising journey. So with the context out of the way, let me now talk a little bit about how us as an accelerator, as an investor, we typically think about evaluating early stage Web3 startups, and what's the criteria that we actually use to select the teams that get either accepted into our program or accepted for investment. And I will particularly focus on the teams that get accepted into the program, because I think this is what is most relevant, to the audience, going through a hackathon, who upon finishing the hackathon will likely be looking at potential accelerators, to really boost the growth and take them through the next part of their entrepreneurship journey. So the 5 criteria we use to evaluate, number 1 is a team. Number 2 is the idea. The 3rd one is competitive advantage. 4th one is traction. 5th one is fundraising. So let me go through each one of these, and keeping in mind that given the early stage nature of the teams that we evaluate and that we assess to come through our program, usually team and idea are the 2 most important criteria out of all the 5 criteria. So starting with the team, what do we want to see? We want to see, first of all, we want to see teams that have the right technical depth. So teams that have potentially experience with writing smart contracts or smart contract code. Teams that have solid technical background, ideally in the Web3 space. But we also, of course, get a lot of founders that are making that transition from Web 2 to Web3. So we want to see a very, very solid technical foundation. Given that this is one of the critical elements required to execute on a lot of the solutions that we see into this space. We also want to see, of course, domain expertise. So, for example, if you're building something around, let's say, music NFTs, for instance, ideally we'd like to see, one of the co-founders who perhaps, comes from that industry or has some experience, in that industry. If, for example, you're building, a game or some kind of gaming platform, again, ideally, we would love to see one of the co-founders, having that experience in their background, whether professionally or in some cases, we also see it from their educational background. So, very solid technically, very solid domain expertise. And of course, ideally, we also like to see, some track record where possible, whether it's an entrepreneurial track record, it could be a corporate track record, it could be a track record in university, given some of the teams that, we evaluate for a program. Sometimes it's founders that are actually still halfway through their university journey. So the reason why the team is usually the most important thing is, number one, is that of course you can have an amazing idea, but ultimately we need to make sure that we have the confidence that you are going to be able to execute on that idea, and take it forward, and be able to execute on the vision and on the roadmap that you have. Now, the second, most important criteria then is typically the idea. And here, the typical questions that we ask the teams when we interview them or when we're reviewing the applications is we want to really understand, what is the problem statement? What are you really solving for? And do we believe that that is, a real problem that needs to be solved, or a problem that nobody else has really either solved or thought about solving? Or alternatively, it could be a white space, white space that, is created because of a new idea, because of a new technology, or something like that. And is there significant value in being able to go after and capture that white space? And as part of that, the second part of idea is also understanding, what is the solution? What exactly are you doing, from a technology perspective, from a conceptual idea perspective, to either solve that problem, or to capture that white space? And so, having these two together as the most important criteria, I would say, if you are an early stage founder, these are the things that you really want to focus on, and that you also want to, make sure that you articulate when you're meeting with, accelerators, when you're meeting with potential investors. Now, going through the other criteria, so the next one is competitive advantage. Now, this one is a little bit related to the idea. One thing that we always see when we open up applications for a program is we see a lot of teams that, are aiming to solve similar problems, or sometimes the same problem, but sometimes with maybe like a different approach to the solution, or different components to the solution or so. And sometimes there might be some other semi-established Web3 projects that are already trying to solve that problem. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't aim to solve it if you truly believe it's a problem to solve, or a white space to target. What's important is to make sure you understand, where do you fit, with a competitive landscape, and importantly is then how do you differentiate, and how do you actually create a moat, compared to other, early stage projects trying to solve the same problem. The next one is traction. Now, this one, I would say traction and fundraising usually have, I would say the lower weight when it comes to our assessment. Now, traction is usually more for teams that might already have a prototype, or, like an MVP, or have something that maybe is in like closed beta testing, or, friends and family testing, something like that. So if you have something, you've had a few people try it out, give me some feedback, or, from a product perspective, or alternatively, if you're starting to build a community around your product and you have, a couple hundred or maybe a couple of thousand people, already kind of engaged or so, that's of course great to see. But again, given the very early stage nature of the teams that we consider, a lot of times some of these ideas are still very conceptual, and of course the traction is quite limited. And then the last one is fundraising, and again, this one I would say has relatively lower weight. We usually don't expect the teams that come out of hackathons and apply for Accelerator to really have any formal fundraising. They might have a bit from some angels. Obviously a lot of times founders do their own bootstrapping. What we potentially like to see here is funds received, let's say, from hackathon prize money, or from grants awarded by an ecosystem, just as a way to see that, okay, clearly you're onto something. Some people have recognized that. And then you've been able to then, get a bit of money, to help you kind of keep going before the next funding period. So those are the 5 criteria. And again, just to recap, team and idea, by far the ones that we definitely think are the most important when it comes from teams coming out of hackathon events. Okay. Lastly, in addition to this sort of 5 criteria framework, I also wanted to share some tips and tricks, that you should keep in mind when you're applying to an accelerator or when you're pitching to an investor. And this is, from having reviewed hundreds and hundreds of applications to our program and having gone through tens, if not hundreds, of interviews with founders. And again, take this more as things to always keep in mind, and almost like a list of some of the basic stuff you should have. So I think the first one is, have a very clear problem statement, right? So, the best, decks or the best teams that I've met are the ones that can very clearly articulate in one sentence, what is the problem you're trying to solve, or what is the white space you are trying to address, just to make it very clear to the audience, and then also to get them exciting, right? If it's a really tough problem, if it's a very large white space, it's a great way to start a conversation and to get the accelerator or the investor excited. The second one is, share as much information as you can about the team, right? As I said, team is, I would say, by far one of the most important criteria for us to assess the teams that we accept into a program. And so for us having, the social media or the internet presence, for example, an updated LinkedIn, a Twitter account, GitHub is super important, particularly for, the co-founder that might be playing the CTO role, so that we can actually see the history of, of that person from a technical perspective, from contributions, from things that they've been working on. And then other relevant background information that might not be on LinkedIn or might not be on a CV, for example, hackathons that you've participated in, Web3 communities that you're a member of, DAOs that you contribute to, anything like that is always very important for us to assess you as a team. The third one is do your research. When you find a problem to solve that you feel it's a real problem, that you think that you're very passionate about going and solving that problem, or trying to capture that white space, make sure that you do enough research on the space you're targeting, and particularly on understanding, who else is trying to solve this, and how are they trying to solve it, and how am I going to try to solve it. And how is that different to some of the other projects or solutions out there? How am I going to differentiate? And importantly, how am I going to build a moat? How am I going to make sure that, in an open source environment, how am I going to make sure that I can create, a solution that is also sustainable, and that somebody else can just come in and just copy it very easily. The fourth one is get into the weeds. I come across a lot of founders, and sometimes some of the technical founders, that they feel like they don't want to appear as being, too technical, and they may want to try to be a bit more, kind of business oriented. My advice is don't be afraid to go into the technical details of your product or the solution that you're building. Part of us as an accelerator, as an investor, to determine whether we truly believe that you have the right solution to address a problem or to address a white space is understanding how things work under the hood. And that also helps us understand how your solution might be different from, other solutions we might see, other solutions that already exist, in the market, and then be able to assess whether you'll be able to, build that defensible moat. And then the last one is, share your development roadmap. Make it clear where you are in the development process. Sometimes, the teams we come across, it's a conceptual idea. Maybe it's a light paper. It's an idea that is well thought out, but there's no product yet, and that's okay, right? Just make it clear where you are in the development process, and also very importantly, what are the milestones and the dates when you plan to hit those milestones. So, when are you going to have the first prototype, or when do you plan to have the first prototype or the first MVP? When are you targeting for testnet? When are you targeting for mainnet? All these details are also important, for us to understand, how long, might it take for us to see a product, and as well to assess, what is actually the feasibility of your roadmap, also based on what you're trying to do and based on the team. So that brings me to the end of the session. So I hope it was really useful. I hope that as you go through the journey over the next few weeks, as your heads down building, once you start to think about, hey, I have a product. I've had, I've kind of iterated on something that potentially will be a business. I'm going to have to go and meet investors. I want to go and have to, potentially apply for accelerators. Hopefully this is useful mind map for you to keep in mind on what are some of the key things that that investors and accelerators look for. And like I said, we are now at the end of recruiting for the next Filecoin cohort, but in a few more months we'll probably start recruiting for the one that comes after that. So definitely keep in touch with us. You can follow LongHash Ventures on Twitter at LongHashVC. You can follow me at Bury, or you can go to our website longhash.vc. We regularly update our audiences on our upcoming cohorts and the recruiting periods and criteria. So thank you so much.